Hey, what's up guys? Aaron here. Welcome to the video. So, Alex Mashinsky is on trial for several crimes, and his trial is set for next January 2025. Now, I'm going to give some updates what has been coming through the court for his trial and just get you guys up to speed on that. Now, Mashinsky and his lawyers are fighting the government because the government can potentially put him away for life, 115 years. So this is very, very serious for Alex Mashinsky. So starting out right here, we have his lawyer supporting his decision, Alex's decision, to preserve testimony of outside witnesses. Now, if you don't remember here, which I covered, Mashinsky wants to preserve the testimony of several material witnesses, and many of them do not live in the United States. So that is why there is a treaty between the US and Israel, another one they uploaded between the US and Netherlands, and then the US and Germany. So they included these in the docket to hopefully, for Alex's sake, get these people to testify. So a couple things that I want to cover. The first, the government has their questions that they want to ask prospective jurors, and Mashinsky's lawyers also has questions for jurors as well. Then I want to cover a couple things. These are the government's motions in limine, I believe that's how you pronounce it, essentially what is allowed and not allowed in trial. And then Mashinsky has his own motions in limine. Now, these are pretty important because it's a matter of what is permitted to be discussed and talked about and brought up in the trial. And I believe this is pretty standard for criminal trials, but I found it pretty interesting, especially if you're covering this stuff like I have. So I'll go through those, and then I'll talk about the next time he will be in court. So really quick, these are the government's proposed questions for jurors. So the government starts out by sharing just an overview of the trial, talking about how he operated a risky investment fund, a little bit about Cell Token, and then they go over briefly the 7 criminal charges that he is facing here. And I'm not going to go through all the questions that the government wants to ask everyone potentially to be on the jury. And they ask a lot of questions like, do you know anybody in crypto? What are your thoughts on crypto? Do you trust the government? Do you know anybody that's an entrepreneur? Essentially anything that could potentially sway a juror to not be totally impartial here. And here we have questions that Mashinsky's lawyers will also ask prospective jurors as well. Really not going to go through everything, but both sides, the government and Mashinsky's team, just want to make sure that the jurors are going to be impartial and not be swayed by any previous involvements or any previous ideas about crypto, etc. So I'm going to go through the government's motions in limine. Could be butchering that word. I'm not a lawyer, but I did go through all 34 pages here. So starting out here, the government has a couple things that they want to make sure are not included in the trial. These are things that can sway the jury or confuse the jury, things that are just not pertinent to the crimes that Mashinsky is charged with. So I'll go through each one at a time. So let's go through each one really quickly. The first one, the court should exclude evidence and argument that the counterparties were negligent, meaning the customers were negligent, or failed to conduct adequate due diligence. And the government is like, Mashinsky's lawyers should not be able to do this because this could invite the jury to blame the victims, meaning blame the customers, for the crimes of the defendant, meaning in this case, Mashinsky. The next one, the court should exclude evidence and claims that others in the crypto industry misused customer assets or engaged in misconduct. So what other people do or what other people did does not excuse what Mashinsky did. Saying that, quote, everyone is doing it is not a defense to the crime of wire fraud or conspiracy to commit wire fraud. That makes sense, right? Just because everybody did something doesn't mean that everybody should be let off the hook if indeed there is a crime. And here they say whether or not the misuse of customer assets or other forms of fraud are rampant in the crypto industry is not relevant to the issues at this trial. The next one, the court should exclude evidence and arguments that regulators or a lack of certain regulation are to blame or provide a defense to manipulation or fraud. So the court should exclude evidence that suggests that Celsius was not regulated in the US and therefore that they didn't know any better. So the government says here that whether or not Celsius was subject to the jurisdiction of the SEC or the CFTC is not relevant to the elements of any charged offenses, and that the argument that Celsius was not subject to the SEC or CFTC is a sideshow that is not relevant. The next one talking about just because there were disclaimers in Celsius's terms of service does not mean that Mashinsky's misrepresentations were immaterial. So these disclaimers do not and could not release Celsius or its employees from criminal liability. So again, these are all things that the government is like, let's not talk about in court. The next one, the court should exclude evidence and argument about the purportedly novel, unprecedented, or aggressive nature of the government's case, or that crypto is unregulated. Claims about the novelty of this prosecution would just be a detour, as the government says. None of this, quote, novelty is pertinent to the jury's task of deciding whether the defendant committed market manipulation and fraud. The next one, the courts should exclude evidence and argument about the defendant's good acts to prove his innocence. And I can see the issue here, right? If the jury hears that Mashinsky is a really great father or a really great guy, that should not be used, right? Because the jury would be confused and swayed about, well, there's the character of Mashinsky and then there's the acts that he did or supposedly did. So yeah, the government says Mashinsky shouldn't talk about his prior good deeds, including charity and philanthropy, or the lack of commission of other bad acts. So that makes sense. And before I talk more about his trial, I first want to talk about the sponsor of the video, which is Aura. Now, I've been using Aura every single day for almost 2 years now, and I absolutely love it. And what they offer is a ton for online safety. They do everything from preventing financial fraud, from identity theft. They have their own privacy assistant, parental controls, even a cyberbullying protection, which I obviously don't use because I'm not a child, but they have a vault for your encrypted info, spam call protection, VPN, antivirus, and a password manager. And this is the app on my phone. This is my recent activity. One thing I really like about it is they automatically remove my information from the dark web. And you can see here, they removed my info from a couple websites and platforms without me doing anything, which is awesome. You do have a home screen here, which shows your credit information. There's a button on the bottom called Family, which you can use to include other people. Here are the data broker removals that they've completed, and then a couple that are in progress. And if you're in crypto, chances are your information has been leaked several times. Celsius had it, BlockFi, Voyager, FTX, all of our information, our private information has been leaked. So I think having something like Aura is super important if you're involved in crypto or you've been in any of these bankruptcies. Just having another set of eyeballs, right? Look at your information and make sure it's not ending up in bad people's hands online. So if you live in the United States and you would like to give it a try, they are offering a 14-day free trial by using my link below, which is aura.com/Aaron Bennett. I would highly recommend you at least give it a try to see if you like it, and then you can decide if you want to continue or not. All right, and let's get back to the video. Next, the court should exclude evidence and claims that the defendant, Mashinsky, intended to repay his victims, and therefore that he did not act with intent to defraud. Here, the government finds some case law saying an intent to return money or property is not a defense to the charge of embezzlement. Also, the defendant should be precluded from offering evidence about the amount of assets that have been recovered through Celsius's bankruptcy for purposes of suggesting to the jury that victims will be made whole. And also, that could confuse the jury because it could show that the progress in securing and recovering estate assets could somehow diminish the scale of the fraud, or that with more time, Celsius could have satisfied customer withdrawals. Again, the government is saying, let's not talk about any of this stuff. This should all be off limits. And the government also says that the court should admit limited evidence about Celsius's bankruptcy. So in a moment, when I get to what Mashinsky wants to preclude from the trial, it's actually similar here where they both don't really want to talk about the bankruptcy. From the government side, the bankruptcy could look like, oh, they are repaying people. But from Mashinsky's side, which I'll get to in just a second, it could look like, oh, there's a bankruptcy. And for most people, bankruptcy equals failure and that there is a colossal mistake, right? So both sides don't really want to talk about it. All right, so let's talk about what Mashinsky's team wants to exclude from the trial. So Mashinsky's team starts out by saying that the government indictment is unwieldy and confusing. The indictment often uses Celsius's company's name and the defendant's name interchangeably, failing to distinguish between the two. And Mashinsky's lawyers are saying that we have 3 months before the trial and the defense, meaning Mashinsky's lawyers, have little specific info with which to prepare its case. So the first thing that their team is saying is to allow into evidence full video interviews, because the standalone snippets selected by the government will create misrepresentations or misimpressions. The full interviews are also essential for the jury to assess Mr. Mashinsky's intent. So I just got an image of jurors having to watch hours and hours and hours of the AMAs. And I wish those jurors well, watching hours and hours of those videos, because that'll be probably annoying and a little bit long. So the next one, the government and its witnesses should be prohibited from arguing or insinuating that, quote, excess buying of sell is an illegal or wrongful act. Now, this is part of the government's indictment, is that Mashinsky and Mashinsky's team, Celsius, whatever, they were buying more Cell token than they needed to pay customers in order to artificially inflate the price of Cell token. And then the insiders were selling their Cell token into Bitcoin or cash and then withdrawing that from the platform. Here they say that Cell purchases, even purchases in excess of what was necessary to pay rewards, are not inherently illegal. This court should preclude the government from arguing that such acts are per se manipulative. Even knowing that prices may rise or fall because of the transaction is not evidence of the manipulative intent. Well, I don't know about that. And I'm not a lawyer and I don't play one on the internet, but there is one reason I could think of why the Celsius team was buying excess Cell token. It was because they knew the price would go up. So I will be curious to see what the court says about that. So the next one from Mashinsky's team, they want to be permitted or allowed to introduce out-of-court communications for a non-hearsay purpose. So the defense says that it expects to introduce at least 3 essential categories of electronic documents and communications for a non-hearsay purpose, and they want to be permitted to do so. So the first one, Mashinsky's instructions to his team, are apparently not hearsay. So to the extent the government argues that Cell tokens purchased by Celsius employees are all attributable to Mr. Mashinsky, the defense must be able to introduce Mashinsky's repeated instructions that Celsius should either 1, buy less than 100% of the amount of Cell tokens needed for customer rewards on public exchanges, or 2, generate revenue for the company through excess sales of Cell token via its OTC desk. And if Mashinsky's team is allowed to talk about this, they say that these instructions by Mashinsky would undercut the government's core allegation that Mashinsky intended to artificially inflate the price of Cell token through excess purchases on exchanges and are therefore relevant. So next, the defense wants to be permitted to share information and documents that Mashinsky received while he was CEO that provided the good faith basis for his public statements. So basically, having information that shows Mashinsky's intent, and his intent was not to deceive or defraud. So partly they want to talk about communications that Mashinsky had with Roni Cohen-Pavan, because Roni was responsible for Celsius's interactions with regulators, including the SEC. Also, Mashinsky's WhatsApp communications with Roni Cohen-Pavan show a clear pattern of Mashinsky seeking advice about whether he can announce something on the AMAs, Twitter, or otherwise, including the company's Cell token buybacks. So much of what I'm talking about is what I covered in my last video about this trial, about Mashinsky wanting to interview these people, including Mashinsky using Roni as an advisor, and how he actually was a very powerful influence in everything that happened and what Mashinsky decided to say. And also, Mashinsky's team wants to show that Mashinsky was using the in-house lawyers, and therefore Mashinsky was acting in good faith and was trying to be as transparent as possible with the Celsius community. So again, in this document here, a lot of what they're trying to do, or a lot of what Mashinsky's team is trying to do, is to put the blame on other people, or to at least spread it out, right? At least spread it out. So next, Mashinsky's team wants to preclude the government from introducing any evidence relating to the bankruptcy filing, or even mentioning the fact of the bankruptcy filing. And they say that by mentioning the bankruptcy, this would put Mashinsky in grave danger. So here they say that Sam Bankman-Fried's trial, where he was charged for securities fraud, commodities fraud, and wire fraud, which are the exact same charges filed against Mr. Mashinsky, the government moved to exclude evidence relating to the FTX bankruptcy. In Sam's trial, they said that the FTX bankruptcy has no place in the trial. And what Mashinsky's team says here is that why the government would want to introduce the bankruptcy is simple, because bankruptcy is often linked erroneously with failure, corruption, and fraud, and it will be used as a code word for, quote, customer losses. Supposedly in the FTX bankruptcy, they mentioned that customers lost $8 billion approximately 97 times throughout the trial, but they say that that's not true because customers are getting 118 to 140%. Now, again, that's not totally accurate. That's going to be US dollar claims, but we all know those differences. They say here that a reference to bankruptcy may trigger visceral reactions among jurors, and the court believes such a reaction carries a risk of substantial unfair prejudice. Now, I can kind of understand this. I get what they're saying, and if I was Mashinsky, I would not want to talk about bankruptcy either, because most people, when they hear the word bankruptcy, they think, oh, this is a huge, huge failure, which it was, but I can see why Mashinsky's team would not want to talk about that. And they say here it can also stoke anger from the jury targeted at the defendant, meaning Mashinsky, evoke sympathy for the victims, and lead to a verdict based on raw emotion rather than evidence. So I personally do agree that, again, talking about bankruptcy can evoke sympathy for victims because they are victims of a bankruptcy and can stoke anger. Sure, I agree. So here is where it gets a little bit funky. If the government plans to suggest that the bankruptcy filing is proof of customer loss, then the defense must be permitted to introduce evidence from the bankruptcy proceeding to show that customers may not suffer any losses at all. Everyone's going to suffer losses here. Unlike if you held, say, USDC or US dollars in FTX, you're actually going to do quite well because you're going to get 119 to 140+% if you're holding dollars. But I don't believe that anybody in Celsius is going to get 100% of their dollars here. So Mashinsky's team says that the defense understands that Celsius is currently seeking to recover more than $3 billion in assets from, we have Tether, $2.5 billion, Equities First, $300 million, and $444 million from FTX. So this whole we're going to get back $3 billion is just not going to happen here. The defense says that they're probably going to bring up the fact that Mashinsky was focused on de-risking Celsius's portfolio, talking about the collapse of Terra Luna. So this evidence, talking about what happened with Terra Luna and about de-risking the portfolio, is what the defense has currently identified as necessary to respond to the government's expected attempt to use Celsius's bankruptcy to suggest that customers are certain to suffer losses, they are, or that somehow Mr. Mashinsky intended that result. So the second, did Mashinsky intend the result? Well, that is up to the jury and the court to decide. But the whole Celsius's bankruptcy suggests that customers are certain to suffer losses. They are. I mean, the likelihood that we get 100% back of our claim is incredibly low. And it's kind of a strange situation because we're not going to know that for possibly years well after this trial concludes. But unless you just held USDC or USDT or another stablecoin, people are not going to be getting 100% of their crypto. We know this. So the next one here, Mashinsky's team wants to respond to the government's theory that Mashinsky withdrew assets from Celsius because he knew it would fail. And this is the proof that Mashinsky's team says the government will provide to show that Mashinsky knew it was going to fail and he withdrew his money. So May 15th, he withdrew $2.9 million. May 27th, he withdrew around $5.1 million. This is the month before the pause. He left approximately $1 million of non-sell assets on the platform by the end of May 27th. And on May 27th, Mashinsky told or allegedly told Celsius customers on an AMA that, quote, "We all have our money in the same platform. I have millions of dollars of my money on the platform as well, and obviously we are in it together." And 2 weeks prior, he withdrew over $7 or almost $8 million or so of non-sell assets. But the defense says that they have a second side of the story that explains the innocent reason Mashinsky withdrew his non-sell crypto assets in May of 2022. And basically, it has to do with him paying taxes. So between June 16th and July 8th of 2022, Mashinsky made $5 million in tax payments. October of 22, Mashinsky made another $5.7 million in tax payments to the IRS. And supposedly, earlier in 2022, between January 19th and April 30th, Mashinsky deposited more than $6.4 million into his Celsius accounts. So they're saying that he deposited money that same year into Celsius and that he withdrew all of that money in May because he had to pay his taxes. They also say that since Mashinsky left his sell tokens in his Celsius account, and at the time they were worth maybe $30 million or so, that also proves his innocence as well, because if he knew it was a sinking ship, he would have withdrawn everything and maybe sold his sell on the open market. And here they summarize it saying that Mashinsky withdrew assets from Celsius to pay his taxes, not because he believed the company was going under. And it shows that Mashinsky did not lie to customers on May 27th, 2022, when he told them he had millions of dollars on the platform, because technically he did. He had $30 million or so of sell tokens. So that is basically it. We have what the government wants, and we also have what Mashinsky wants as well to include or to exclude from the trial. So until November 8th of this year, the different sides can object to the motions in limine. So the government can object to what Mashinsky's team wants, and Mashinsky's team can object to the government. We have until November 8th to hear those. And finally, the next time that Mashinsky will be in court will be November 8th. Now, these are arguments on the defendant's motions to dismiss. Now, I believe that means this is going to be Alex's team trying to get this entire case thrown out. And also the one about preserving testimony, which I talked about here, where he wants to basically interview all of these ex-employees and other people that could prove his innocence, or at least, again, spread out the blame to other witnesses. So guys, that is basically it for the video. We have Mashinsky's trial still scheduled for January of next year. I don't know if individuals like myself who are not in the press or the media can go in and actually hear it live. If so, I'll try my best to make it up there to New York. I'll also include the docket where you can see a lot of the documents I talked about in this video. Some you have to pay for in order to get access to, but a lot of them are free. And again, if you are in the United States and you have not checked out Aura's 14-day free trial, this is a software I use 24/7. I've had it on my phone since January of 2023, so pushing 2 years now. I highly recommend you give it a try. They have their 14-day free trial if you use my link, which is aura.com/Aaron Bennett, or you can click the link in the video description. Hope you guys are doing well. Till next time, talk with you soon, and bye for now.